In the lively town of Nsukka, joy filled the air when Chinyu married Obiora after a whirlwind romance. Their love looked pure and unshakable, the kind people spoke about with admiration. On their wedding day, drums echoed, women sang, and children danced through the streets. Neighbors smiled proudly, saying, "This is how love should be." Chinyu, dressed in bright colors, looked at Obiora with eyes full of hope. He held her hand tightly, whispering promises of forever, and she believed every word. Life as newlyweds felt like a dream. Every morning, Chinyu woke up to the sound of Obiora's laughter, and every evening they sat together, sharing meals and plans for the future. They strolled through the busy market hand in hand, buying fruits, joking with vendors, and leaving behind whispers of admiration. People would say, "May their joy never end." To Chinyu, those words felt like blessings from the heavens. She had found not just a husband but a best friend. Then came the moment that made her heart even fuller. One morning, her body gave her a gentle sign of change. After a visit to the midwife, her joy spilled over. She was carrying new life. "Child, their love's fruit." She touched her belly softly, whispering, "This is our beginning." That night, she imagined Obiora lifting their baby high, smiling with pride, and herself watching with tears of happiness. To her, nothing could go wrong. Her family's joy had only just begun. When Chinyu finally told Obiora about the baby, she expected joy. She thought he would lift her up in his arms, maybe even dance around the room. But instead his face changed. The smile she loved so much disappeared, and in its place came silence. Days turned into weeks, and she began to notice the distance. He no longer reached for her hand when they walked. He came home late, always with excuses about work or friends. When she tried to talk about the baby, he would sigh deeply, his eyes fixed elsewhere. "Chinyu," he said one evening, his voice cold, "do you realize how heavy this responsibility is? I am not ready to be tied down." The words pierced her heart like a knife. She tried to reassure him, telling him that love could carry them through anything. But Obiora only shook his head, avoiding her gaze. The man who once promised forever now acted like a stranger. As her belly grew, so did his absence. Neighbors noticed. Some whispered, "Maybe he is not happy." Others said, "Chinyu must have done something." Each comment was another wound she carried in silence. She cried at night, whispering prayers, hoping the man she married would return to her with love in his eyes. Then one stormy night everything broke. Thunder roared as rain poured heavily against the roof. Chinyu heard footsteps and rushed to the door, only to see Obiora dragging a bag behind him. Her heart raced. "Where are you going?" she cried, her voice trembling. He turned, his face hardened. "I did not sign up for this life," he spat, his voice rising above the storm. "I refuse to be trapped in a cage of responsibilities. You and this child, handle it on your own." Chinyu froze, her hands instinctively wrapping around her stomach. Tears streamed down her face as she begged, "Obiora, please, don't leave us. Need you. Our child needs you." But he did not listen. With one final glance, he walked out into the night, the rain swallowing his figure until he disappeared. Chinyu stumbled outside, barefoot, standing in the storm. Her hair clung to her face, her dress soaked, her body shivering. She clutched her swollen belly and cried out, "Why? Why now, when I need you the most?" The neighbors peeked through their windows, but no one stepped out. They only watched as a young woman, once celebrated in joy, stood abandoned in the rain. At that moment, Chinyu felt her world collapse. The love she believed would last forever had crumbled in her hands. Yet even in the crushing pain, she whispered to her unborn child, "I will not give up on you. I will carry you, even if I carry this burden alone." And there, under the heavy storm, her strength began to quietly take root. The days after Obiora's departure were the hardest of Chinyu's life. She woke each morning to an empty bed and a silence that screamed louder than any storm. The man who once promised to love her forever was gone, leaving her with nothing but growing fear and a child inside her womb. The whispers started quickly in Nsukka. When she passed through the market, women leaned close to each other, their voices low but sharp. "Did you hear? Obiora left her, and she is pregnant." Others shook their heads and said, "What a shame! How will she survive alone?" Every word cut into her like glass. Even her own relatives were not kind. An aunt told her coldly, "This is what happens when a woman trusts too much in a man's sweet words." Instead of comfort, she received judgment. Instead of support, she was reminded of her loneliness. Chinyu swallowed her pain and forced herself to keep moving, because she knew the little life inside her needed her strength more than anything. With no husband to provide, Chinyu turned to the market. Every morning, while other women prepared breakfast slowly at home, she carried baskets of vegetables on her head, walking with heavy steps to her stall. The sun burned her skin, the weight of the baskets pressed on her back, but she stood there each day, calling out to buyers. Some people pitied her and gave her extra coins, while others bargained harshly, caring nothing for her swollen belly. The money she made barely covered food and visits to the doctor, but she kept going. Her body carried the scars of struggle. Her feet swelled so badly she could hardly stand by evening. At night she tossed and turned, unable to sleep as pain shot through her back. Tears wet her pillow, though she never let anyone see them. She often pressed her hands against her belly, whispering, "Don't worry, my child. I'm here. I will not let you suffer." Those quiet moments with her unborn baby gave her the strength to rise again each morning. Loneliness became her shadow. She missed Obiora's laughter, even though it now felt like a cruel memory. She missed having someone to share her fears with. When labor pains threatened early one night, she clutched her stomach and cried out, but no one came. She sat alone, breathing hard until the pain eased. In that silence she realized fully, she was on her own. Yet beneath the tears, something strong began to grow inside her. Chinyu was no longer just a young wife, she was a mother preparing to fight for her child. Every step to the market, every coin she saved, every tear she wiped away was a promise. She would carry this burden alone if she had to. For her baby, she would endure it all. When life felt too heavy for Chinyu to carry, help began to appear in the quietest ways. Mama Ijeoma, the town's midwife, was the first to notice her pain. She would often stop by Chinyu's stall in the market, her eyes warm with kindness. "My daughter," she would say softly, placing a hand on her shoulder, "do not let shame or sorrow break you. Motherhood is not weakness. It is strength." Those words, simple yet firm, were like medicine to Chinyu's wounded heart. Sometimes Mama Ijeoma would bring her a small pot of soup or a bundle of vegetables. "Eat well," she urged. "Your baby needs you strong." On days when Chinyu's legs could barely carry her, the midwife would gently scold her for working too hard, then slip a little food into her basket before leaving. For Chinyu, who had been abandoned and judged, these small gestures felt like lifelines. Then there was Ikin, a quiet stranger who often passed through the market. At first, Chinyu barely noticed him. He would come to her stall, ask for vegetables, and hand her money. But she soon realized he always gave more than the price. When she tried to return the extra, he would smile faintly, shake his head, and walk away without a word. His silence spoke louder than any pity. It was not charity, it was respect, a quiet way of saying, "I see your struggle and I honor it." Week after week, Ikin kept coming. Some days he bought more than he needed, other days he simply dropped the money on her table and left quickly. Chinyu never asked why, but in her heart she felt gratitude. She began to look forward to his visits, not because of the money, but because his presence reminded her she was not invisible. These silent helpers became her hidden strength. In a town where whispers of judgment still followed her, Mama Ijeoma's encouragement and Ikin's quiet kindness formed a shield around her heart. They reminded her that even though Obiora had walked away, not everyone would. At night, when the loneliness pressed too hard, Chinyu would sit with her hands on her belly and whisper, "We are not alone, my child. There are still good people in this world." The thought of Mama Ijeoma's gentle voice and Ikin's quiet generosity gave her courage. Slowly, Chinyu began to lift her head higher in the market. She smiled more, greeted customers with renewed strength, and no longer walked with a heavy slump of shame. She realized that love did not always come loudly with promises. It sometimes came in silence, in actions, in small gifts that carried great meaning. And it was those silent acts of kindness that kept her moving forward, step by step, toward the day she would finally hold her baby in her arms. The day finally came when Chinyu's body told her it was time. It was a hot afternoon in Sukha when the first sharp pains gripped her. She dropped the basket of vegetables she was arranging at the market and clutched her swollen belly. Fear swept through her, but Mama Ijeoma was quickly by her side. "It is time, my daughter," the midwife said firmly, gathering women to help her home. Chinyu's legs trembled as they led her away, the pain growing stronger with each step. Hours passed like days. The night grew darker, and the storm outside seemed to echo her cries. Chinyu gripped the wooden bedpost, sweat pouring down her face. She screamed, begged for strength, and at times felt she would not survive. I cannot do this," she gasped. But Mama Ijeoma held her hand tightly, whispering, "Yes, you can. For your child, you must." Those words became her anchor as another wave of pain crashed through her body. The women in the room fanned her, prayed for her, and encouraged her as she pushed through the long night. Every breath felt like fire, every contraction like a tearing storm inside her. Her heart pounded, her body shook, but she refused to give up. She thought of Obiora walking away in the rain, leaving her broken. That memory fueled her determination. She would not break. Not now. Not when her child needed her most. Then, just before dawn, a new sound filled the room, the piercing cry of a newborn. The moment she heard it, her pain melted into tears of joy. Mama Ijeoma lifted the tiny baby, wrapped him gently in cloth, and laid him in Chinyu's arms. "A strong boy," she announced with pride. Chinyu gazed at the little face pressed against her chest, her tears falling onto his soft skin. Exhausted, trembling, yet overwhelmed with love, she whispered, "You are my reason to live." Word spread quickly through the compound. Neighbors who once whispered about her shame now gathered outside, waiting to hear. When they learned she had delivered safely, many nodded in quiet respect. They saw not a broken woman, but a mother who had endured pain and abandonment yet stood firm. Some women murmured, "She is stronger than we thought." Others said, "Her husband left, but she has proved she can rise alone." As the morning sun rose, its light streaming through the small window, Chinyu held her baby close and smiled for the first time in months. She was no longer just the abandoned wife people pitied. She was a mother, chosen by life to carry a new beginning. In her baby's cry she found hope. In his heartbeat she found courage. And in that fragile little body, she found the strength to face whatever the world would bring. Months passed after the birth of Chinyu's baby boy. Life was not easy, but each day she found joy in her child's smile. She carried him on her back to the market, sang him lullabies at night, and whispered promises of a better future. Slowly, people in Sukha began to respect her strength. She was no longer just the abandoned wife. She was a mother who stood tall against shame. But peace never lasts for long. One quiet afternoon, when the compound was filled with neighbors resting in the shade, a sound of footsteps echoed at the gate. Heads turned, and there he was, Obiora. He walked in confidently, dressed in fine clothes, his shoes polished, his wrists shining with a golden watch. His face carried pride, as if he had never left. Children paused their play, women stopped pounding yam, and men exchanged shocked glances. Chinyu's heart stopped the moment her eyes met his. She felt her knees weaken. Memories of the stormy night when he abandoned her came rushing back, but here he was, standing as though nothing had happened. She clutched her baby closer to her chest, her breath shallow, her body frozen. Obiora cleared his throat, looked around the compound, and announced loudly, "I have returned for my son. He carries my blood. He belongs to me." His voice was bold, dripping with entitlement. The neighbors gasped, their eyes darting between Chinyu and him. Some covered their mouths in disbelief, while others whispered, "After all this time, he has the audacity to come back?" Chinyu felt her heart shatter all over again. Her baby stirred in her arms, sensing her trembling body. She wanted to scream, to ask him where he had been when she was crying alone in the night, when she fought for every breath during labor, when she carried shame and struggle on her back. But her lips would not move. She stood still like a statue carved from pain. Obiora, seeing her silence, smirked. He stepped forward as if he had every right, as though the months of abandonment meant nothing. "This child," he said proudly, pointing to the baby, "is my blood, and by tradition he is mine." The compound grew tense. Some elders frowned, shaking their heads, while others whispered among themselves. The air was heavy, filled with judgment, anger, and disbelief. Everyone waited to see what Chinyu would say, but she could only hold her son tighter, pressing his small body against her chest, as if shielding him from a storm. For the second time, her heart broke, not because he left, but because he dared to return as if love and sacrifice meant nothing. She had built her world again from ashes, yet here he was, trying to claim it with nothing but arrogance. And in that painful silence, the community realized, this was no ordinary homecoming. This was a battle about to begin. Obiora's return quickly turned into a storm. The moment his bold words filled the compound, he stepped closer to Chinyu, his eyes fixed on the baby in her arms. Without a thought, he stretched out his hands as if to snatch the child away. "Give him to me," he demanded, his voice sharp and mocking. "Do you think you, a woman abandoned and alone, can raise him properly? This boy carries my blood, and by tradition, he belongs to me." Chinyu's arms tightened instantly around her son. Her heart raced, fear clashing with anger inside her. "You have no right," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough for everyone to hear. Her eyes filled with tears, not of weakness but of the pain of fighting the same man she once loved. The baby stirred, sensing the tension, and Chinyu rocked him gently, whispering, "Don't worry, my child, Mama is here." Obiora laughed bitterly, his pride swelling. "You raise him alone. What will you give him? Shame, struggle, poverty." His words cut deep, and many in the crowd murmured in discomfort. Some nodded, agreeing that tradition favored the father's claim. Others shook their heads, whispering about the cruelty of a man who had abandoned his wife in her time of need. One old woman in the crowd said quietly, "Tradition is one thing, but where was he when she suffered?" Her voice was drowned by another elder who replied, "Blood is blood. A child belongs to his father's lineage." The compound was divided, every whisper echoing louder than the last. Obiora, fueled by the support of some, stepped forward again, his hand reaching toward the baby. Chinyu stepped back quickly, her body trembling yet firm, her son pressed even tighter to her chest. Her voice cracked, but her words carried fire. "You left me in the rain when I needed you most. You left me to carry this child alone, to bleed, to suffer, to cry in the night. You have no right to call yourself his father now." The compound grew still. The crowd held its breath. Obiora's face darkened, his pride burning under her words. "You dare to speak to me this way," he hissed. He looked at the people and shouted, "She is nothing without me. She cannot erase the fact that my blood runs through this child." But Chinyu did not move. Her eyes, wet with tears, met his, and her arms locked around her baby like a shield. "A father is more than blood," she said softly, but the strength in her voice silenced many. "A father is sacrifice. Father is presence. A father does not run away." The murmurs grew louder. Some turned their faces away from Obiora, ashamed. Others shook their heads, unsure where to stand. And in the middle of the storm stood Chinyu, heartbroken, trembling but unyielding, refusing to let the man who abandoned her snatch away the very reason she had survived. Just when the tension in the compound felt unbearable, Mama Ijeoma stepped forward. Her face was calm but serious, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Obiora. "Listen to me," she said firmly, her voice carrying over the whispers and murmurs. "Do you all see this woman? Do you know what she has endured?" She gestured toward Chinyu, who clutched her baby tightly, trembling but still standing. While this man lived freely, chasing his pleasures, she suffered. She carried this child alone. She worked herself to the bone, bore pain that no one should bear alone, and yet she did not give up. A hush fell over the crowd. Even Obiora paused, caught off guard by the force in her words. Mama Ijeoma's presence was commanding. she continued. A father is not just someone whose blood flows in a child. A father shows up, sacrifices, and protects. A man who abandons his wife and child forfeits every right to claim them later. Her voice grew stronger, echoing through the compound. You cannot run from responsibility, then return as if nothing happened. You cannot demand what you abandoned. Ikeen stepped forward quietly but with determination, standing beside Mama Ijeoma. I have seen her struggle, he said, looking around at the neighbors who had gathered. I have seen her work in the market, her feet swollen, her hands blistered, her eyes sleepless from worry. I left her money sometimes, quietly, because I could not bear to see her suffer alone. And yet this man, who claims to be her husband, left her without care, without love, without honor. He paused, letting his words sink in. You all see what courage looks like, he added, turning toward the crowd. It is not Obiora's boldness today. It is Chinyu's quiet strength for months, raising this child while carrying the weight of abandonment. A man who abandons his wife cannot claim his child. Not in spirit, not in truth, and certainly not in honor. The crowd grew silent, their previous whispers of doubt and confusion replaced with murmurs of agreement. Heads nodded, some elders crossing their arms in respect, others whispering to their neighbors about the injustice of Obiora's actions. Even the children stopped their play, sensing that this moment was important. Obiora's face flushed, his pride shrinking as he listened. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died on his lips. He had no defense against the truth laid bare in front of everyone. Chinyu's arms around her baby tightened instinctively, and for the first time, she felt a surge of relief. She was not alone. There were those who saw her suffering, honored her struggle, and spoke out for her when she could not speak loudly enough herself. In that moment the power shifted. Mama Ijeoma and Ikeen had reminded everyone that real strength is measured by sacrifice, love, and presence, not by blood or titles. The gathering was silenced, the whispers stopped, and the truth stood clear. Chinyu was not just surviving, she was victorious, and no one could take that away. Obiora's face drained of color as Mama Ijeoma and Ikeen finished speaking. The crowd, which had been divided and tense just moments before, now turned its collective gaze toward him. Whispers that once tiptoed around sympathy for the man now turned sharp and judgmental. How could he leave her like that? A woman muttered, shaking her head. And now he has the nerve to come back. An older man, respected by everyone in the compound, stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm, and it carried the weight of truth. Blood is not enough, he said, his eyes piercing into Obiora's. A child is more than the blood in his veins. Father is sacrifice. Father is presence. He who abandons his wife forfeits the right to call himself a parent. The words struck Obiora like a hammer. He opened his mouth to reply, but the crowd's silence swallowed his voice. Neighbors who had once pitied him now shook their heads in disappointment. Women crossed their arms, glaring, and men whispered about his arrogance. Even the children stopped their play, staring at him in confusion and disbelief. Every step he took toward Chinyu seemed smaller, weaker, as if the compound itself refused to let him regain power. Obiora's pride, which had carried him boldly through his return, began to crumble. He looked at Chinyu, her arms around her son, her eyes steady and filled with quiet triumph. She was no longer the fragile, abandoned woman he had left behind. She had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and courage that no amount of his fine clothes or empty words could overshadow. He tried one last time to speak, to demand his child, but the elder shook his head slowly, dismissing him with quiet authority. Go, the man said. You have lost the right to demand anything from this mother. Your time has passed. The words echoed through the compound, leaving Obiora trapped in the truth he could no longer escape. Shame and anger wrestled within him. He felt the weight of every judgmental glance, every whispered comment he had ignored before. He realized, too late, that the child he tried to claim belonged not to him, but to the mother who had fought for him with every ounce of her being. His arrogance, his abandonment, and his selfishness had cost him everything that truly mattered. With his head lowered and shoulders slumped, Obiora turned away. His polished shoes splashed in the dirt as he walked past the compound gate, every step heavy with humiliation. The whispers followed him, sharper now, carrying the weight of truth and community judgment. He looked back once, catching a glimpse of Chinyu smiling softly at her child, and in that moment, he understood fully the life he had thrown away. The man who had once believed he could walk away and return unchallenged now disappeared into the distance, broken and humiliated. The community watched him leave, no pity left in their eyes, only the quiet approval of justice served. Chinyu remained, standing taller than ever, her baby safe in her arms, and her spirit unbroken. Chinyu walked slowly through the compound, her baby cradled gently in her arms. Every step felt lighter than the one before, as if the weight of months of pain and struggle was finally lifting. Neighbors and friends who had watched her fight quietly now surrounded her, offering smiles, nods, and words of encouragement. For the first time in a long while, she felt the warmth of respect and admiration fill the space around her. She glanced down at her child, his tiny fingers curling around hers, and whispered softly, "You will grow in love, not in fear. Mama will protect you always." Her heart swelled with hope. This was her triumph, not through wealth, status, or revenge, but through courage, patience, and unwavering love. Every sleepless night, every tear shed alone, every struggle in the market had led to this moment. She was no longer the woman abandoned in the rain. She was the mother who had stood tall against heartbreak, judgment, and betrayal. The community began to speak of her quietly, praising her strength and resilience. Women told their daughters, "See her courage. See how she fought for her child." Men nodded, realizing that true honor comes from loyalty, sacrifice, and love, not from empty titles. Even the elders smiled in respect, acknowledging that Chinyu had earned a place not only in her family but in the hearts of the people around her. Obiora, who had once thought he could claim her life and her child, became nothing more than a shadow in memory. People whispered his name with disbelief, not respect. Chinyu, on the other hand, became a living example of perseverance and strength. She held her son closer, her smile soft but confident, knowing that together they would grow in a world built on love, courage, and dignity. The past could not touch them anymore. This was her life, her story, and her victory.